This is Sweet 16. The session is 90% for the 90% bats, and the other half is birds. Our first speaker today comes all the way from Australia. Josie Stokes is with the City of Gold Coast Council, and she'll be speaking on what are the critical challenges when a road agency fails to implement their own environmental policy. I think we've all heard these stories about meeting environmental commitments or not before. So, Josie,
I got it, Mike. Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks so much. Okay, thanks, Alex, for that introduction. It's so great to be here in Colorado with so many intelligent, passionate colleagues. I know that you're all batty as hell. Firstly, and most importantly, though, I would like, as a proud Wiradjuri woman, I would like to pay my respects and acknowledge that we are meeting today on unceded First Nations country, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend that respect to any other Aboriginal, First Nations, Torres Strait or Pacific Island peoples in that room or in the sessions today. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I conducted my work, the Gumbaynggirr people, which were just a little bit north of where Chris was working on with his presentation yesterday. So just a quick overview of today's talk. And so can I get a show of hands how many people have been to Australia? Okay, that's not too bad. We need a few more of you to come. We've got some good bats to see. So while we may not be the largest state in Australia, we are quite heavily populated, and Transport for New South Wales is responsible for maintaining and operating approximately 18,000 kilometres of the road network. And of course, we have bats that occur in those networks. So we have bent-wing bats. These guys don't breed in, everyone stop texting me, thank you. These are smaller guys, they're obligate cave breeders, so they don't actually breed in any of our structures, but they'll roost colonially in the structures and then fly hundreds of kilometres away to birth simultaneously in limestone caves. So while they do occur, they just don't breed, they just roost over winter, sorry. And that's them in the bat box. However, one guy, the southern Myotis macropus, is Australia's only fishing bat. He has oversized feet, that you can see there, that he uses to rake his prey, so they go like this. That is not a Myotis from here, I think it's a brown Myotis. They have two birthing events, depending on where you are in Australia, but in New South Wales, they have two birthing events, usually commencing October, November, and another one in January, February. The problem with this is they do roost, but they also breed in our structures. So any kind of impact can be seen as significant. So we only have one species of Myotis. I know that I think North America has about 18, I think. And these guys will be the focus of today's presentation because replacing long-term breeding habitat is more difficult than replacing temporary roosting habitat. So what are the habitat types? I think we're all pretty across this, but culvert lift points or lift holes, drainage scuppers when they're dry, but also when they're wet, expansion gaps without concrete plank bridges, roughened and exposed sections. So you can see up here, you can see the staining there in the bottom, but when you zoom in, we have a cluster of Myotis up there. Timber bridges, boy, do they love timber bridges. 99% of our timber bridges have southern Myotis occurring in them, and they breed, usually in the transverse decking, cross girders, corbels, and stringers. The underside of parapets, now this is a good one. So if you haven't seen, if you don't know what a parapet is, that's that gorgeous little sexy concrete situation that people put on the side of bridges to make them look so pretty. And so then if any fairy martins or wasps want to create nests, they can just like quickly blast them off on the outside without any kind of, just let's make the bridge look clean, whatever. Hang on, there's a notification, sorry. So yeah, the underside of the parapets actually provide roosting habitat for large-footed myotas, and they breed them as well, and roosting habitat for the miniopterus or the bent wings. The funny thing is they won't actually move into the parapet, like underneath here, until that's roughened. So when the paper wasp or other wasps come in, and then they start to use their nest, and they can grab on with their claws. Yeah, thanks. So what are the impacts of roads and road projects and maintenance on threatened microbat populations? Well, obviously local extinctions of species such as myotas that have specific requirements, particularly breeding. Mortality during bridge cleaning, which is one thing I came across in ICOET in 2013, in my first ICOET. I was so gobsmacked that people were just, some of the DOTs were just coming through and just gurneying all the fairy martin nests off without any environmental assessment, and you're just seeing hundreds of brown myotas like dead on the ground. So I'm really happy to see that particularly Texas DOT has come a long way since 2013. So I really like to commend the DOTs for coming on board and really getting on board in the last, coming up to speed in the last 13 years. Culvert maintenance is a big one, but the real key for, I guess, for us in Australia is bridge removal. If you remove a bridge, you're going to remove 100% of the breeding habitat for the southern myotas, which can also be a cumulative impact if you're looking at removal of bridges across the whole region. So, how does the State Transport Agency manage microbats in their assets? Well, prior to some species being listed under state legislation in 1995, they did absolutely nothing. But they got a little bit better. I came on board, and then we started doing a whole lot of other things and really mitigating, working to engineer, going from kind of putting temporary bat boxes to installing permanent habitat. However, in 2023, Transport for New South Wales published the Microbat Management Guidelines with input and review from microbat specialists across New South Wales and Australia, including me. It is 35 pages long and provides very useful information if the guidelines were implemented. But more on that later. There is a QR code there, so feel free to scan that and get out of your way so you can scan that. The guideline was really designed to assist transport staff to identify types of structures, similar to the training we were doing the other day. So we're kind of teaching you guys how to identify if there's scats or habitat for bats on the bridge or the culvert or the structure that you're looking at to maintain or to replace. But in firstly, managing biodiversity on road projects, Transport aims to avoid, minimise and mitigate. But it's really hard to mitigate or offset. We also offset for residual impacts. In the case of species such as myotas, when they're breeding in your structure, it's impossible to offset that. You can't go, well, I'm just going to offset that bridge for forever. Who's going to look after that bridge? No one. So if we can't offset breeding habitat, then we sought to implement long-term breeding habitat into new structures. So this is kind of this is a little bit of I'll run through this very quickly. This is our kind of evolution of microbat breeding habitat. So from installing wooden boxes on on bridges to bat boxes. This was the particular example I was talking about the other day, that we were excluding bats from a culvert, and we had them hanging from a fig tree here. There were plenty of bats in them. And the fig tree branch got so heavy that the bats fell into the river. There's a choose your own adventure box. We've got cyclase boxes, which are recycled plastic and wood, marine ply. No uptake by myotas. This is what happens in a heat wave event. We've got experimental trials putting, floating bat hotels. Yes, it sort of worked, but a python ate the bats. Bat caves, they did not work. They were nowhere near the water, and Myota's needs to be within 100 to 200 metres of water. Then we started to look at something that similar to what Texas was doing, TDOT, and that's putting purpose-built recess chambers into the culvert. And that's just kind of a close-up of what they look like. And then we also included the roughened obverts up there for the bentwing species that like that. They were successful. And then we started to replicate microbat roost features into the culvert relinings themselves. And these are the crude drawings that we start with. And that's pretty much the process of creating permanent cave-dwelling microbat roost habitat in a new culvert. Then we went to engineering long-term habitat into a new bridge in Sportsman's Creek, just near Grafton. And this was a long-term situation. It was a significant impact. We had 300 myotas breeding on the bridge. It was a kind of 4 or 5 year project. We won lots of awards. I've got standard design drawings for it. But basically, we created this little bat cave here, and then the bats moved into it. And so, while this is not a super T, pretend it is, we roughened the parapet. We put breeding roost habitat all across the decking, and then we left the super T joins unsealed and roughened, and we had other habitat as well. It worked, monitoring results were great, everything was awesome. Then we have emerging issues. Timber truss bridges. We've got 48 timber truss bridges under the management of transport, and they sought to retain 26 and remove the others. We also had 2 programs called Fixing Country Bridges and Bridges for the Bush. Well, the Fixing Country Bridges program just was a deal to give out $500 million to New South Wales councils to replace timber bridges with brand new concrete bridges. Well, unfortunately, Transport forgot to remind the councils of their obligations under the environmental legislation to undertake environmental assessments or surveys for microbats or other threatened species around the waterways. So by the time I was engaged as a microbat specialist to advise on 2 councils, Nambucca and Bellingen, approximately 50 bridges had been blown up with dynamite without any inspections for microbats. So what did I do? Well, I got wild, as I would, for those that know me. I got on the phone to one of my ex-colleagues who happens to be an executive director at Transport, and I told her the situation. She asked if I could write up a 1-page fact sheet to go to all councils who were successful with their funding application for the Fixing Country Bridges. You can also scan that guy there. It's a bridge version of the microbat guidelines, essentially, in 1 page. So, case study 1. Thought it was going to be all gravy. We had approximately 27 submyotas roosting in the old timber bridge, and you can see with my sexy little flow camera, that's the main maternity site there. And then we had a couple of guys in the string here. So the main maternity site was just over this side. Potential impacts on that include abandonment of an important breeding site, threat of mortality during construction, and temporary disruption to life cycle stages of breeding, birthing, and raising pups. So we developed a construction microbat management plan to mitigate these impacts. However, the council contractors neglected to mention one major factor in their construction methodology. And that was dumping of 5 tonnes of quarry stone to stabilise the riverbank prior to implementing the construction mitigation management plan and during birthing season. So that was all here. The main breeding, the maternal colonies here. Those noise blankets weren't up. Those noise blankets came later. So basically, the bats flew out. During the day, they were taken off by kookaburras, currawongs, and piebald birds. So while that wasn't the best outcome, working with council, they decided to design permanent precast concrete bat caves or slots to bolt into the new deck, which was great. They were designed by the council engineers and have been installed on 5 other bridges in the council area. The new Kalang River Bridge, you can see it's pretty close to the old bridge. This is 5 metres away, that new concrete bridge, and the bat boxes are somewhere in here. To date, it's not known if the bats have moved back into the bridge, which is the new habitat, as there was no requirement to monitor. It is also not known if the bridge is going to be retained or for how long. So the take-home messages are: state transport leaks. It's when a state funding program becomes a key threatening process on a bat. So a key threatening process in Australia and New South Wales is something that can significantly affect a species to drive it to local extinction. And that's exactly what happened with the cumulative impacts within that region. It's essential that state agency policies and guidelines, they need to be easy to use and consistently implemented across projects, not just one. I think I implemented the construction guidelines in 2011 and they were taken up by industry, but somehow the microbat management guidelines just sat on the shelf and they don't get disseminated. State agencies, transport agencies must include directions to councils to, if they're receiving funding, to undertake all relevant environmental legislative obligations and assessments. They also must have more oversight and compliance when handing out millions and billions of dollars to councils who don't really have experience in microbat management or environmental management at all. And even when you have a watertight microbat management plan, that can be incorrectly implemented as well. There is so much that's open for interpretation, and I'm sure that some of you in the room have had experience with that. So sometimes the construction components are not always provided to you. And if you need to chat more, please drop me an email. And I've got standard designs for microbat habitat and whatever else you need. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes. Folks have questions?
What was the response like from the councils? Like, how have they been reacting to this, and what are you doing to work on that relationship?
Well, that's a great question. the first council fired me. that was an embargo. They'd blown up 12 bridges by that stage without any environmental assessment, and they didn't want to know about it. Bellingen Council had a little bit more buy-in, and I was able to kind of get them to bring them aboard and say, if you want to design some habitat, then let's go for it. That's really cool. But I wrote the construction management plan, but then there was this kind of weird period because I was a principal ecologist. I was a little bit more expensive than the juniors. And so they basically got a guy who was a council engineer to implement the microbat management plan, and it was all levels of wrong. But I had a local guy who would just drive past every day and he'd be like, oh my God, they've just dumped all this quarry stone in, and they've just done this and they've just done that. And I watched the bats fly out. And it was just, so I didn't get more involved with that project. And then I left consulting quite soon after that. I was pretty wild because I figured that they would never hire me or want me back to deal with their bridges, because I basically went above their heads and went straight to transport. The funny thing is though, as I was checking for the talk, I would have thought that transport would have put the fact sheet with the Q&A for the funding application. So councils can apply for this funding on the website, and there's a list of frequently asked questions, and it doesn't mention anything about environmental assessments still. So I'll be taking that up with my executive director when I leave this session.
Good morning, thank you. I was just curious, when you're installing these habitats and bridges, do you also write maintenance plans, and how do you coordinate normal maintenance activities for bridges such as milling bridge deck? And I don't know how Australia do the same thing, but milling bridge decks, sealing bridge decks, deck joints, replace, that kind of normal work that has to occur on these bridges. How are you planning for that?
So that's where the microbat management plan guidelines come in place, and that was to train all of the construction staff and all the transport staff that do the maintenance and things like that. So that was for them to use. It tends to get used more internally, but and once a bridge, or if sometimes transport will build a bridge and that bridge will get transferred to council maintenance. And so for me, I try to write the maintenance schedule and a maintenance outline of what they should do. And because usually if we're putting in like habitat, it's fairly localized, and modus, they're not in huge numbers like you guys have here. So there'd be like, 20 in one little section, maybe 5 in the other. And because you can mark where they are on the bridge, the engineers know and the cleaning teams know. And the Northern Rivers guys are really good. They've been across this for 15 years with me. I brought them along for the journey. Other regions, not so good. Southern region, they're slowly coming on board. But yeah, I try to write into the maintenance schedules.
Good morning. I'm not a biologist, so
That's okay.
this is a silly question. For the wooden boxes and like accessory structures that are installed underneath the bridge, if there's a bridge activity that requires the removal of those, can those be like removed and relocated if the back still use them?
Yes, we've actually done that. So in the back of the microbat management guidelines, there's some case studies. I can find it. Put there. So if you scan that QR code there, towards the back of it, there's some case studies, and we have actually put bat boxes up onto a bridge, and we've actually moved them. We just sort of wrap calico cloth inside it and around it, and we've actually moved the boxes during pup season across to another bridge, like pretty close. It was something I would never recommend. I mean, nothing went wrong, but I try to avoid doing anything during pup season. And unfortunately for us, that means works can only take place between October and April. So they only have a short window.
Thank
No
you again,
worries.
Josie.
Yeah, I bet Jill to speak.